Welcome to Chicago.
Thank you.
We're
Thank
very
you,
happy
thank
to
you.
have you here. And this topic in particular and the content of your book, I think, really resonates with the kinds of stuff that we are struggling with in the city in particular. So your narrative, your experiences around your coming of age, your interrogations about your manness,
Yeah.
your blackness, your youth, I think is something that really plugs into what the city needs right now. Just because, everybody, wherever you're from, you see the stories,
Yeah.
and they're real. Like, there's a serious moment in terms
Absolutely.
of the loss of life, the violence, the kind of sort of chaos that are in the internal minds, but also the experiences of the young black men in the city.
Yeah.
So, in the spirit of that, I welcome this conversation for that.
Me too. Thank you.
Wonderful book. So, The Invisible Man got the whole world watching. I read it twice. I really appreciate, what it does for the conversation about masculinity, and I appreciate how vulnerable it is. So it's a wonderful. It's a memoir, but it's also like expose. It's opinion. It's personal. It's for us. It's for him. It's for everybody in ways that I really appreciate you navigating all these kind of spheres.
Thank you.
So, wonderful book. If you haven't got it, if you haven't read it, I encourage you all to make sure you get a copy before you leave. And you can get it signed because you're here. So let me get right to it. There's a lot to talk about, serious stuff that we want to deal with. So I'm gonna go right to Nate Parker.
All right.
I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go there. But I will start with the thinking about the conversations that in black communities that I'm hearing around the retelling of the slave narrative period pieces. What I hear a lot from folks is that people are tired of seeing slave movies. They're tired of seeing the black experience told the backdrop of that type of tragedy and trauma.
Yeah.
And in a similar way, so like the tension is we don't want to forget it, but we don't want to focus on it. And so in a similar way, I want to start with this idea because your story is framed with the murder of Trayvon Martin. So the thing that I'm curious about is, as we're thinking out loud around framing stories, and you spent some time as a journalist. So the idea of where you start the story, and you deciding to start with Trayvon Martin, I wonder about how we think about that colors the direction of the conversation. Your reflections about manhood, your ideas about blackness, your positioning, the conversation around Black Lives Matter in the context of what's happening, starting with Trayvon Martin. So I wonder about, what does it mean to start in tragedy? And what are other places that, some of the stories about blackness began that would change the direction of the frame of that conversation?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the story starts where it starts, and that's that is the catalyst for me to start to do the interrogative work that you see in the book. Not to say that it wasn't happening before, but to really, because what happened when Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, you could see exactly where the story was going. It was around the young black men's lives, and it's about, this is what black parents have to say to young black men to be able to move through the world and comport themselves and whatnot. We are still endangered, all of these things. And it's not to, I don't want to discount that and say that it's not still important for us to talk about the ways in which black men have to navigate white supremacy. But what we missed then was the interior of Trayvon's life and Trayvon as a stand-in for black boys generally, right? We don't examine then, we don't ask about, even in the conversation of white supremacy, we won't ask about what that does to your sense of self-esteem, right? How you view yourself through that prism. You don't ask about other forces of oppression that one may participate in and be complicit in, right? Particularly when it comes to cisgender hetero black men that we tell the story of American racism through. We don't ask about how one shapes their identity in the crucible of patriarchy and homophobia and untreated mental illness and all the things that I tried to grapple with here in the book. And when we don't do that, the question is, who else are we rendering invisible, right? And what work does that do in terms of the formation of that self? if you are committed to ideas around equality and justice, and you have a self that is created with the denial of other people's humanity in that framework, then how committed to those ideas are you, right? And so I mean, like, with all that said, like, the story just starts where it starts for me, and like, if we're in, like, I understand like the reluctance because Black stories have been so tragic for so many people, and like to relive that trauma, whether it be through literature, whether it be on film, is hard to do just from the perspective of maintaining one's sanity, right? But we can't ignore then. And this is separate from Nate Parker and Birth of a Nation, which I haven't seen and refuse to see, and like not even from Nate Parker and all of the story around his rape allegations. I just don't think that Nate Parker was equipped to tell this story based on like things that I had heard him say in his politics beforehand. But all that aside, we can't be reluctant to go to slavery because like it shapes so much of our understanding of present day United States, right? Like that is the foundation, right? It is Native genocide and the enslavement of African peoples. Like, that's how we get here. And if we can't talk about that, if we can't be honest about the mechanisms that were set in place and that we continue to repeat again and again and again, then we're not willing to address we're not going to be able to address the persistent oppression that is born of the perpetuation of those systems that like we find in new forms.
Okay. And I don't know, we haven't talked much about like my work. We drove in the car, I saw you a couple places around the country, but my work is, I'm a psychologist. And so the thing that you're saying around dealing with trauma, deciding to address it or avoid it, like, there's real kind of things. And the plea you make for Black communities paying attention to mental health is one of the strongest like pleas for that that I've seen in literature and in the public sphere. So I really appreciate you helping us challenge these ideas of what it means to be vulnerable or strong, and this sort of false dichotomy between strength and weakness, particularly for Black men. I feel like Black men in particular have a really hard time understanding that there's a strength in revealing your struggles and learning from your mistakes and just normalness around the conversation around mental health. And so from that perspective, I wonder what you think would help us as a community beyond sort of you telling your own individual story. Like, what do we need to help remove some of those stigmas? I think your story goes a long way in that, but like, what else would you give, what advice would you give to professionals, to practitioners, social workers? There might be people here in the room that do this kind of work. What else can we do to move this conversation around mental health further, more forward, more open, and more authentic? Like, we need that, I think.
I think, Black communities being reluctant to trust any institution is normal, right? Like that's ingrained in the fact that every institution is based on anti-Black racism, right? Like we know that whether we like have the facts in front of us or not, like intuitively we can feel that. And so I understand again that sort of reluctance, but I guess part of it would be from a professional standpoint, like we need more folks that are understanding how forms of oppression impact selves, impact your experience of trauma, right? Like you can't simply personalize it. We have to draw out then the broader institutional impacts, right? So you can't be treating Black folks and not understand racism. Like that doesn't help them, right? And then from like a community standpoint, I feel like we have to recognize just how like that walking through simply surviving is not that's not producing the sort of people that we're looking for. What we're doing is we're silencing people. Like we're telling people that their story does not matter when you tell them that somehow talking about the things that are hurting them most, the things that make them feel emotions that we somehow denigrate as if every of human emotion is not somehow valid. You know. What we have to do is break ourselves out of like the heroic storytelling of our history, because I think like what we do is we're trying to stand in a tradition that doesn't really exist, and like, oh, they survived slavery and they survived through Jim Crow and resilience and everything. But if we had the ability to sit down with them and talk about what that trauma meant, and how much healthier they would have been had they had the opportunity to be able to talk to somebody, to have real mental health professionals sit down and evaluate them, and like all of that, like who knows what that story looks like with that in mind. But that calls into the question of access, and healthcare is not seen, like mental healthcare period, and then mental health care specifically, not seen as a right. Like we still don't have the right to healthcare. So access is a thing, but if we don't think of it as necessary, then we don't include it in our advocacy and activism. So like shifting that, and I think it shifts so many different points of contention that we have with different issues. Like if we were to center mental health and questions around mental illness in the gun violence conversation, like it changes the way that it changes the solutions that we think of, if we think of all of the, like when we think about the term black on black crime, right? We can discuss that, we can talk all day long about like how that's used as rhetoric to distract from institutionalized racism, right? It's true that like young black people are killing young black people, right? But if we ask ourselves the question about why that happens on the basis of centering their mental health, and ask the questions around anxiety, around depression, around the lack of resources that leave one feeling that hopelessness, if we ask the questions about being surrounded by violence and experiencing the PTSD, and if we ask questions around like if the framework were more, why are people willing to risk their lives over property that doesn't belong to them, like streets that literally they're being pushed out of, like what makes you suicidal? Like to me that like it's suicidal that you're doing this, so why are you willing to risk it? And if we then think of it in those terms, then we're thinking about resources now. We're thinking about access to recreation and education and adequate housing and how like water, clean water. It still bothers me so much that people in Flint's water is still poison, still undrinkable. We're talking about water, and you can like think about the fact that like there are children growing up now, not just the physical effects of drinking poison water, but knowing that they live in a country that would allow that to happen to them. So imagine what they're going through in terms of their emotions. Like if we think about that now, it changes the way that we address these things.
And particularly young people that have grew up in the country for the last 8 years, where that's happening, where the face of the country is still a black man.
That disconnect is,
So what do you think about the opportunity that we have ahead of us with it not being a black man in front of the face of the empire? And we have two options that have interesting problems in their own right. But like the psychology of how that impacts how a young person grows up and sees their world influenced by this leadership. What are some of the opportunities that, for refocusing the conversation, for, I don't know, maybe not relying on the system in as much ways, and having to be forced to think through how can we deal with what can we do for ourselves? Like, what are the responsibilities for fixing some of these problems?
Yeah, I think we've seen that toward the, we've seen that with the movement that arose in response to Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown.
Sure.
In terms of understanding the limitations of representational politics and electoral politics, that you cannot simply elect black faces to high office and expect trickle down care for Black lives. You can't depend on simply the electoral system to move policy, even if you think that whoever you elected is going to be friendly toward, is sympathetic toward the causes that you believe in. That the pressure builds through grassroots organizing, and for me, it's like what issues do we organize around, right? It's like what gets the most attention. Now, police violence it's very necessary for us to address this, absolutely. But when the platform that came out of Movement for Black Lives came out, they didn't just talk about police violence. They talked about economic security, right? They talked about a redistribution of wealth. We're talking about really fundamental changes in the institutions of the United States that lead before we even get to the point that a police officer is holding a gun on a young black person. So there, I think that the moment we've seen now what that looks like in terms of divesting ourselves from, or at least from the younger generation, divesting themselves from the appeal of representational politics. I mean, it makes you feel good, right, for a moment, but it doesn't always produce the results that you're looking for. And so, simply put, it's a continuation of that. Whoever is elected, and you talk to any of the organizers and activists of any of these organizations who are I'm not endorsing anyone, and I will vote for in terms of who I my best interest, but they are still the opposition. It just tells us the terrain that we're going to fight on.
That's interesting. Representation reminds me of another thing that I love about the book, is that as you tell your story, you weave in a lot of pop culture. You talk about the music you listen to. I was just talking to you before, we were at one of the same shows. I went to Hampton too, actually. We've been friends. We didn't know it. I went to Hampton, then I moved to Atlanta after. So one of the concerts you described was Dave Chappelle's show that I was also at. So I'm reading this. I'm I see myself in the story in a way that's really powerful for me, but also really important in thinking about the impact of media, of culture, especially in the internet age, the smartphone age, that young boys, young people, period, have lots of access to representation of themselves in ways that sometimes can be hurtful, sometimes can be helpful. And so I'm curious to know about, I specifically want to know about your ideas about Luke Cage and your centering of Trayvon Martin in your story, but also just, the book is, we just got it, but it was written a long time ago, so there's other things that have happened in the pop cultural world. We're in a moment that it feels really black. The Solange album, Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar. There's so many things happening that allow for conversations around blackness. You got unapologetically black on your shirt in a way that was not true. Would not have been as comfortable maybe even a decade ago. And so, what are some other things that have happened in the pop culture more recently that didn't make it to the book, because the book was out, that you feel like has move the conversation forward or backwards, or how do you feel that the terrain now in terms of media and the blackness of it helps us?
We're living through a black cultural boom period right now. There's just so much, and it's not even just that there's a lot. There's a lot of quality stuff that we're consuming right now.
Queen Sugar,
Queen Sugar. I just saw Moonlight, and that's it's a beautiful, beautiful film. There's so much, and it's funny because I didn't talk about it in the book, but the book for me was modeled. basically what I tell people is I'm trying to do a literary version of Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City. Okay. Right? Like that to me, that album and the structuring of his story spoke volumes to me, like resonated with me in a way that like I wanted to imitate it. It's so dope that it's a narrative, but it like it's playing with time a little bit, but like getting into Kendrick's sort of like we're getting into his experiences, but then his reaction to those experiences and the inner monologue and like a real interrogation of his desires and the factors that impede those desires and all of those different things. So I was trying to do my best Kendrick Lamar with the book. But yeah, there's this there's so much happening right now that I just I feel like a lot of times I will still run into people though that are saying like, oh, there's just this one way that people like black people get seen in media and stuff. I'm just like, what media are you consuming, right? So not everything's going to be right for everyone, but there's so much variety that's happening, and like I couldn't be happier in that sense that like more of the representation that we've been looking for is available to us, right? Like, and more of the stories that we would hope to be told are being rendered very beautifully. You asked about Luke Cage specifically.
Do you feel like it's a fair tribute to Trayvon Martin and his legacy?
I had problems with Luke Cage, because like the first 6 episodes of Luke Cage. Here's what I say. Like the show. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Marvel superhero in the Marvel universe. Luke Cage is a black superhero, and his powers are being impenetrable. Like you can shoot him and nothing happens, basically, and he's got super strength and everything. He is a part of this Marvel universe, and he got his own Netflix series. And
the image of him that's really popular is him in a hoodie.
What they were doing was deliberately drawing on the image of the hoodie after we've experienced Trayvon Martin being killed, and the hoodie sort of becoming this symbol of resistance, but also lost life. And it's supposed to be a direct tribute to Trayvon Martin. But the first 6 episodes of this, I'm just really frustrated because it felt like a rehash of like old style politics, in that like what Luke Cage is most concerned about is like black gangsters and young kids saying the N-word, you know? Like that, because I'm like, yo, he's bulletproof. Like the first thing I'm doing as a black man, if I'm bulletproof, is running up into the police precinct like it ends today, you know? Like that to me is a black superhero, you know? But like it's so concerned, like it was just so concerned with the effect of this black gangster on Harlem and whatnot, and then the one politician that seems to care about her neighborhood and whether or not they have resources is corrupt. You know, it bothered me. There was a twist there in like episode 7 where it got kind of interesting, and then it starts dealing with the imagery of the hoodie later on. So it's, I feel mixed on Luke Cage. I feel mixed on pretty much anything that is censoring that this is part of why I didn't want to see Birth of a Nation. It's like black male heroism in a very specific kind of way. I think Luke Cage did well with the rendering of black women and offering a variety of different voices there. But what it does is typically what these stories do is draw on a certain type of machismo and masculinity to be a rebuke to white supremacy, because what we think we've lost in that fight is our right to manhood and the very limited ideas around what that means. And it's like strength and power and dominance, right? When all that does is then reinforce sexism, reinforce patriarchy, but not even just reinforce it. It makes us think of patriarchy and sexism and misogyny as somehow liberatory, right? Because if black men have access to that, then we're talking about liberation. Like if we can just mimic what white patriarchy, then we are free, right? And that's just not the case, right? So again, asking the questions around, if we are forming a conception of self that denies someone else their humanity, how valuable is that self? You know.
You actually have a passage in here that speaks to that I really, really appreciated. Where is it at? I'm gonna have a little bit of a reading. I wish I had some music. Where is that? Page 6. I'm gonna read some of your book to you, like a bedtime story. I just love this part. And I have a follow-up question about this. We resist this conversation because black men and the culture they create so easily become scapegoats. Without nuance, it very quickly turns towards the blaming of black men for the existence of misogyny, homophobia, and the rest of those American problems. Not a careful examination of how black men can experience or contribute to these forms of oppression, and the more the image of black men is connected to everything wrong with the world, the easier it is to justify killing us, right? So I love that, pushing for the nuance.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important, in addition to it justifying, them killing us, or black people are the bad guys, and not figuring out what you're saying, like how we contribute to, how we're influenced by, but also just the internalization of this sense that manhood is inherently wrong, that there's something just inherently toxic about being a black man that I feel like that we need to struggle with in some ways. And so one of the things that I wanted to sort of speak to is in what ways does your book help us create some sense of like a conversation about masculinity that's not in opposition to toxic masculinity, right? We're in a moment now where I see the term now is fuckboy. I don't know, there's a lot of older folk in the room. So I've seen poems and memes about the fuckboys. We talk about toxic masculinity or hyper-masculinity, but we don't have as much conversation about like just regular masculinity. Like what does it look like what does it even mean? What are the roles? What are the responsibilities? Are there some standards to it? And without that, the young men that I work with get all these other influences about what it means, what it looks like, devoid of conversations that are more nuanced and more sensible and more structured and respecting, the equality and all that kind of thing. So I wonder if there's some way I wonder in what ways your book helps us with that conversation. How do you talk to young men? Are there some things that I can teach young men about what is a man supposed to do? What does it look like? How do you know when a man shows up? Or is that an outdated conversation in and of itself?
That to me, I feel like that's what we're trying to get. Like I don't have a pat answer for that. Like what the book is wrestling with the notions that have been passed down and asking why we've accepted them and what damage they have done, and then asking myself and asking others who are sitting in similar identities to say, okay, so what would it look like to form a masculinity that does not depend upon a notion of power that is derived from violence and coercion and dominance, right? Like, what would that look like?
Right.
How would we incorporate a sense of compassion and compromise and empathy into our understandings of ourselves as men and our understanding of ourselves specifically as black men? Like I don't like. The problem is that you can try to do that work, but understand that you're going to fail consistently because the systems that are in place, which you derive power and privilege from, are still there, and you like sometimes you like it, right? Like, and that's the problem, right? Is you like not having to do that interrogative work. Like you like being able to go see Birth of a Nation and not have to think about Nate Parker's rape allegations. Like that being something that you're just like, I mean, it happened a long time ago. I don't like, it doesn't impact me in any way. Like you like having that. You like being able to walk down the street and, you know, this is sort of the tension here where it's like black men want to be able to walk down the street and not have police harass them, but so often cisgender hetero black men are responsible for the harassment of black women on the street and making public space unsafe. You like being able to do that. You like being able to establish that dominance, right? When do you step back and say, why do I enjoy that? What am I deriving from that? What is pleasurable about that for me? And why does that pleasure why is that pleasure more important than that person's humanity, right? So those are just like, that's where the conversations need to be, like, and what your self looks like on the other side of that is like, I don't want to dictate that for everyone, but it is a matter of like, are you asking those questions or not?
And as you're talking, I'm also thinking about an additional struggle to that conversation in a place like Chicago, where I'm saying you need to be more compassionate, but they're in survival mode. Like, there's a savagery that they feel like they have to put on that becomes an armor that just gets them from home to school. And so it almost seems impenetrable conversation in the context of like so much, struggle all the time. But in thinking about that and thinking about, I read the book. I saw you at the seminary, the co-op. Because I go to these kind of things. I got a PhD. Like I'm an audience. There's this particular audience. But the boys that need this won't know about it. It's not necessarily in their curriculum at their schools. Their families aren't going to get it for them for Christmas. And so the other thing in thinking about moving the conversation forward in a way that impacts the culture, I just wonder, as the book is new, you're on the circuit. I wonder what are some of the ways that you have thought through getting it to the audiences. Like, I love you guys, right? This is great. I'm glad y'all came. But this is a book about young black men, and there aren't any young black men in here, right? Young.
No, certainly. It would feel that way if like I was basing it on just the crowds that come to something like this, right?
Sure.
But then, like I receive pictures of like mothers who like giving it to 10 and 11-year-old boys, right? Like brothers at Morehouse who are like studying this in their psych department, and then hearing from folks who read it and work with young boys, like the conversations that they're now having in those classrooms, like in prisons, like, you know what I mean? It would be great if I was just having this conversation with young black men all the time, like if that were the case. But the point of the book is that it travels, and that it like you take it and then someone else takes it and they take like that, and it carries through, and people are like disseminating it through means that like people that understand that these boys don't have the same access that they do, and are deliberate about taking it and ensuring that they have it. So I'm not as worried about whether or not it's reaching them. I think that it definitely is and will continue to, hopefully. Especially when the paperback comes out and the price gets knocked down. So you know what I mean?
I mean, but it's those kinds of things. So you mentioned earlier that there's a natural like distrust of institutions in this place just because of history and all that kind of things. But it seems really difficult to navigate around infrastructure, like
Yeah,
the University of
absolutely.
Chicago, or like it's nice in here. We got the sound, like it's really we rely on the comforts of the infrastructure of these
Yeah.
systems, but in other ways, it keeps us from being able to develop, black bookstores or black publishing companies, and I just wonder about the process of the getting the conversation out and how that impacts the content of the conversation in ways that can help it so that the next time you come to Chicago, you could talk here, but also talk at a
Yeah.
local underground bookstore, or
Yeah.
make sure that the communities that need the work, we're having an unapologetically black conversation in a front of a room full of white people, right?
Yeah.
And so that the white gaze on the conversation that we're having is, I think, also unique in this moment, in that there's a seeking of digging into different
Yeah.
experiences that people are having, but it also makes me think about everybody's real comfortable with it, and so it
Yeah.
makes me wonder, like, maybe, like, I want somebody to get mad and like say you can't come here no more because you said something so radical or so black or so, what I mean, but like that's not the moment we're in.
Yeah.
There seems to be, so I wonder about the commodification of conversations about radical blackness through publications, through companies, through festivals that are seeking
Yeah.
it, but it stays here. Like I struggle with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I struggle with that. It's the fact that, I'm a writer,
Yeah,
and I also need to pay my bills,
Absolutely.
and
Right.
there's but so much money in being a writer, right?
Right.
It'd be great if I could write a column for Ebony magazine and that like pay my bills.
Yeah.
But Ebony magazine don't be cutting them checks on time.
Right.
Like love to what Ebony magazine has been, and I know Kierna Mayo and Jamila Lemieux, who were heading it up over there for quite some time, like reinvigorated the website and then moved to the magazine and did incredible work there. But sometimes what happens is, like, when we do get control of our own institutions, we start mimicking the issues that we find in other institutions, right? And that's a problem. And that's not to say that like that's guaranteed to be the case every single time, but we get so few chances, right? And that's the bigger issue, is that we get so few chances to be able to try it out, that one failure means that we're never going to get the opportunity again. Like, so the stakes is high, as De La Soul would put it, and that it becomes even more difficult for the building of those new institutions that would have the distributive powers for like just to have like black owned spaces and black operated spaces producing black work, reaching black audiences. Like, that's difficult to build. Like, and it's like, I think about them like, oh, they did that with Black Wall Street. What happened?
Right.
Like, we still exist in the crucible of white supremacy. Like, if someone decides that has gained too much influence, it is like they just wipe it out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, they bombed a move in Philly, right? Like, those things happen when we create our own spaces, and they become havens for us. So it's like, it's also a matter of practicality for some people. It's like, all right, I'll play the game. I will exist in these spaces, and I will do as little compromising as possible. And it's like, okay, so how do we move the needle forward if everyone has to keep making compromises?
Yeah, that's for the next panel. I think I saw my 5-minute signs. I think that we definitely want to make some space for audience participation. So this is a good time to start to transition into that. I saw 2 hands already. So I saw her hand first because she's faster than you. Sorry. So we'll go here and then we'll come here. Thanks.
I wonder if maybe you could comment on platforms. I'm thinking of respecting you're a writer about different platforms, and if you could kind of envision going forward into the future and reaching the next generations, something effective that can really transmit more broadly. I'm thinking of Congressman John Lewis's latest publication in graphic novel. I'm wondering if you're interested in that. And then I think of the success of the culture of the Renaissance still is quite limited because outside the machine of marketing, for instance, abroad, certain films that really deserve to be seen broadly don't even get outside the US because there's very little box office speculative lucre behind that. So maybe if you could comment about platforms and what you are adding to your really impressive bio of how many different publications you're participating with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if a graphic novel is in my future. I have no clue. If I had an idea and there was an artist that I wanted to work with, like that would be dope. I'd welcome that. Yeah, I think taking advantage of all of the platforms that do exist and ensuring that like the messages are always there. So it's like if it's YouTube, then you go to YouTube and you're producing the video content there. Like, it's a shame that Vine is being shut down because that was such a hub of like youthful Black creativity, telling stories and like, I mean, it was genius. Like some of the stuff that they were able to do and some of the ideas that they were able to capture and express there. But like, I just see it happening, right? Like, and I'm not necessarily going to be on the vanguard. Like, I'm not going to be the one that produces that. I may have to follow like somebody that's 19 years old right now because they understand it in a different way that I don't, right? Like, I don't know how to use Snapchat. I still have not figured it out. But they're doing incredible things with these platforms that like, one day like, it's not even necessarily whether or not I'm going to be the one to do that. Like, I'm looking forward to when we're not turning to just like, oh, you published a book, so you're gonna be the one to like innovate and do all of these new things. And it's like, there's a whole generation coming up, digital natives, like don't know that the internet didn't exist before. And like, they are playing with this stuff and they are like, they're going to be the ones that tell us what's next. And we'll all catch up with them later, or we'll just like be old fogies and be like, remember back in my day. Like that's what, you know, I look forward to knowing what they think is next and what they think, what's speaking to them and how then to translate what I'm trying to do into that language. I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. In your opinion, the election of Barack Obama as president of the United States, not once but twice, did it move the needle, in your opinion? Did the conversation take a different tone, and a tone that you would have expected?
It would just be dishonest of me to be like, Barack Obama being elected president meant absolutely nothing. It's obviously it means something in a nation that once like captured and imported African peoples, enslaved them, built the infrastructure that then produces the greatest wealth like we've seen in history for one nation, and then turns around hundreds of years later and elects a man named Barack Hussein Obama with a Kenyan father to the highest office in the land. Like, that's progress. Like, if as slow as it may be, like, that's progress. But like, for me, the question is progress toward what? You know, like if it's just a matter of electing Barack Obama, then that doesn't address the systems. What it says is, if you are Barack Obama, you can succeed. Like, you can achieve all of the things that are like that the American dream is supposed to afford you. And I think that it's like the election of Barack Obama then like does the thing that American history always does, and it like makes it scares people, and then there's a retrenchment and a backlash, right? Like there's a retreating back into modes of of survivalist modes for those committed to white supremacy, in which they're like, oh, our country is being taken away from us. We have, like, Donald Trump is not an accident, right? Like, he is the culmination of the backlash. Like, immediately you have the Tea Party response to Barack Obama. And then you start having, you have like Occupy Wall Street happening. And you have the Dreamers. And you have Black Lives Matter. You have these groups that are demanding in the, like, under the first black president, that something be done about the deep-seated inequality in this country, right? You have people asserting their right to humanity, and you have a black president. Though all of those things threaten what underpins the United States and like what makes the United States the United States, and that is a commitment to various forms of inequality. And the folks who believe America to be their birthright, which is mostly like these like aggrieved white men who are voting for Trump now, like they see in Trump a savior. And he is the culmination of the backlash to all of these different movements and different forms of progress that we have seen here. And so what that means for the conversation, whatever conversation it may be that happens in the wake of electing Barack Obama, is the same thing that it has meant historically whenever we have moments of genuine progress happen in this country, is that the system itself does everything it can to protect itself. And so you can say, oh, there was like the end of slavery, and then there was Reconstruction, and then there was the convict leasing program, right? Like the convict leasing system, and there's the building of the prisons, and there's the black codes, and there's the like basically re-enslavement of black populations, like, and I mean almost literally, because they make these prisons on the plantations that used to house them, right? And then you can like we have these big moments. We can talk about like Roe v. Wade happening and like autonomy for women over their bodies, and then you see like we have to fight in the Supreme Court for the right for these clinics to stay open, right? Like this is the nature of progress in the United States, because we are not asking a more radical question about how our society is structured and whether it should be structured that way, and then completely wiping the slate clean and building new structures. We just keep trying to put new faces in those old structures and say, oh, well, maybe that'll change it. And we just move at this glacial pace. And it's frustrating for like the people who continue to experience those forms of oppression. And then then you tell me, not you, but like, then you tell me that like racism's over because Barack Obama was elected president. And I'm just like, this is not how this works. Like, you can't tell me that and tell me that everything else that is happening in this moment is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
We have our last two questions over here.
Moving the conversation forward, that's a tall order. One of the things that has been gestating a long time is an African American museum. Mm-hmm. Now, I grew up thinking museums were great. I mean, you know, you're talking about Snapchat, and you know, so have you been to the museum, and can you share your thoughts about it? Because of course, they're retelling history in a very selective way.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have not been to the museum. That's actually when I realized that I was not that important of a black person, because I saw all the important black people posting on social media about getting invited to the museum, and I'm like, oh, mine must have like gone to spam or something, I don't know. No, but I look forward to one day getting there and hopefully being able to answer your question later.
And this is our last question.
Well, I think you're important because you're starting the conversation. I have a friend who says that the value of Trump is that the conversation that didn't start with Obama is starting here because the cockroaches, in her language, have come out on the table. And Trump has said to them, you don't have to go back under the table. It's okay for all you cockroaches to be on the table. And what she means is that it's forcing the conversation out in the open. But I am so troubled because I don't know
You're
who
scared of
really
cockroaches,
starts it
as
and
all of
where
us
and
are.
how does it begin?
I would say, no, that Trump is not as useful to this conversation that we're trying to have as we would like him to be, simply because what people then do is locate the problem with Trump, right? Like, Trump is a vile, misogynist, accused rapist, but that doesn't speak to the larger problem of male entitlement, right? Like, Trump is a racist who thinks that Mexico is sending criminals and rapists. But that doesn't then get us to talk about the ways in which we treat undocumented people and the ways in which our immigration policy, we deporting and violently housing people. Like, that doesn't do that. But when we have a convenient boogeyman like Donald Trump, we're able to absolve ourselves of our complicity because we can say it's Donald Trump and it's the people that we see at those rallies who are like supporting him and using all this vile language. Like, it's those people. And as long as we can prevent those people from getting in power, and as long as we can prevent those people from having a strong voice within our systems of government, then we'll be okay. But that doesn't take into account that all of us sit in positions, sit in identities that depend on the continued oppression of someone else, and we're not willing to do that self-interrogative work, and then divesting ourselves from those systems and saying that we're willing to live without those privileges so that we can build a system that's more humane and respectful of people's dignity and humanity. Like, we're not willing to do that because, and it gets easier when you can locate it in someone as vile as Donald Trump. So I don't know that Donald Trump is as helpful to us unpacking all of that than people want him to be.
Bars. We're going to end on that. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
time.
Thank you for your time.
Chicago.
I appreciate it, brother.
And go buy his book. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone.